He swore they'd never have a future, but 5 years later, the Millionaire CEO moved in next door, and met the daughter who had his eyes. Adam Miller had always believed that control was everything. Control built his empire, control kept his emotions in check, and control allowed him to remain untouched by weakness. At 35, he was already one of the most powerful men in the city, a self-made millionaire, CEO of one of the fastest-growing corporations in the country. People admired him, feared him, even envied him. But no one really knew him, not even the woman he once swore he would never need. Leah Morris had entered his life quietly, like a breath of spring air in a world made of glass and steel. She wasn't loud, she wasn't ambitious in the way that others around him were, and yet there was something about her that had disarmed him from the very beginning. Her eyes had warmth, the kind of warmth that could melt the walls he'd spent years building around himself. She didn't care about his money or his title, she spoke to him as if he were just a man, not a name printed on the cover of business magazines. That was why he let her in, and that was why it hurt so much when he pushed her away. The night it all ended still haunted him. Leah had stood in his office, trembling, holding something small and white in her hands. She was pale, terrified, but her eyes glimmered with something more, hope. "Adam," she said softly, "I need to tell you something." When she told him she was pregnant, time seemed to stop. He should have felt something, anything, but all he felt was fear. His mind went to headlines, to shareholders, to the image he'd worked years to create. A child didn't fit into that picture. He had stared at her for a long moment, his jaw tightening. Then he said the words that would follow him for the rest of his life. "There will be nothing between us." And no one. Leah had flinched like he had struck her. For a second, she looked as if she would speak, but then her shoulders sagged, and she turned away. He remembered the sound of the door closing more vividly than anything else. That sound was final, cold, echoing in the hollow of his office like a sentence. After she left, Adam sat at his desk for hours, staring at nothing, a gnawing ache spreading through his chest that he refused to name. He told himself it was for the best. He told himself she'd be fine, that she'd understand, that it was better this way. But the image of her eyes, hurt, shattered, and full of something that had once been love, never left him. He drowned himself in work after that, taking every deal, every flight, every distraction that could keep his thoughts from returning to her. But late at night, when everything was silent, her voice would come back to him, the tremor in it when she said his name. He'd close his eyes and imagine another version of himself, the kind of man who hadn't been a coward. 5 years passed, and the emptiness only deepened. He had everything people dreamed of: penthouses, cars, awards, women who threw themselves at him just for his name. But nothing ever felt real. He had built a world of glass, impeccably designed, but one wrong touch away from breaking. Sometimes he would wake up from dreams he couldn't remember, his heart pounding, and he'd find himself thinking about what might have been. He didn't even know where Leah had gone. She had disappeared completely, leaving no trace, as if she'd never existed. And yet, there were moments when he swore he saw her shadow in a crowd, or caught her voice in a passing conversation. It wasn't love that haunted him anymore, it was guilt. When the board decided to expand operations into a quiet coastal town, Adam accepted without hesitation. Maybe he wanted a change, maybe he just wanted to run again, but part of him knew the truth: he was tired. Tired of the noise, tired of the hollow victories, tired of the emptiness that came after every success. The town was small, calm, and unremarkable, but the silence felt different there. It didn't suffocate him. It gave him space to think, to remember. At first, he didn't notice the houses around him or the people who lived nearby. He told himself he didn't care. But the truth was, he was restless. Sometimes, late at night, he would stand on his balcony, looking out over the dark line of trees, and wonder where Leah was. Whether she had found someone else. Whether she had kept the baby. He tried not to imagine a small hand holding hers, a child with her smile, or worse, with his eyes. The thought of it twisted something deep inside him, something he couldn't explain, even to himself. He would take a drink, tell himself it didn't matter, and try to forget again. But forgetting her was like trying to stop breathing, it wasn't something he could control. The irony was that everyone around him thought he had mastered life. But if they could see inside his mind, they would see the cracks, the endless guilt, and the quiet longing he could never put into words. He had everything except peace. And though he didn't know it yet, peace was about to return to his life in the most unexpected, most painful, and most beautiful way possible. The small coastal town where Adam had moved was nothing like the world he was used to. Gone were the skyscrapers and glass offices that had once defined his existence. Here, the streets were quiet, lined with old trees and the distant hum of the sea. People greeted each other by name, neighbors left baskets of fruit on porches, and life moved at a pace that felt foreign to him. At first, he resisted it. He kept to himself, diving into work as always, trying to fill the silence with conference calls and reports. But something about the stillness began to seep into him. It stripped away the noise, leaving him alone with his thoughts, his regrets, and the ghost of a woman he hadn't stopped thinking about for 5 years. Every morning, he took the same walk through the park near his house, passing by the old fountain in the center. The locals said it was the heart of the town. Children played around it, couples met there after work, and on weekends, artists sold their paintings nearby. Adam watched from a distance, not really part of it, just a shadow passing through. He always told himself that was enough. But lately, he had begun to wonder if that was just another lie he'd built to protect himself. One morning, while sipping his coffee on the porch, he heard laughter drift across the street. It wasn't the laughter of adults, it was light, bright, and pure, the kind that only belonged to a child. The sound hit him unexpectedly, stirring something deep inside. He looked up and saw a little girl running across the lawn of the house opposite his. She had dark brown hair that curled at the ends and eyes so vividly blue they almost didn't seem real. She couldn't have been older than 4 or 5. Her small hands held a stuffed rabbit, and her laughter carried through the air like music. Adam felt a strange tightness in his chest as he watched her. He didn't know why, but he couldn't look away. There was something about her that seemed familiar, something that clawed at the edge of his memory. Then, as he turned to go inside, the front door of the neighboring house opened, and a woman stepped out. She called the girl's name, Sophia, and for a brief moment, time stopped. The voice was soft, melodic, and painfully familiar. When she stepped into the sunlight, he saw her face. Leah. He froze where he stood, his heart pounding so loudly he thought she might hear it from across the street. She looked different, her hair was longer, darker, her posture straighter, but it was undeniably her. She was wearing a light blue dress, her expression calm as she watched the little girl twirl in the grass. And when she smiled, it was the same smile that used to undo him in an instant. Adam took a step back, gripping the railing of his porch to steady himself. For a few seconds, he couldn't breathe. The world seemed to narrow to just the sight of her and the little girl with eyes so familiar they made his stomach twist. He knew it then, though he couldn't admit it aloud. The child was his. He spent the rest of the day in a fog. Meetings blurred together, words were spoken to him that he didn't really hear. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Leah standing there, sunlight catching in her hair, holding the hand of a child that had his eyes. He told himself it could be coincidence. He told himself not to jump to conclusions. But deep down, he already knew the truth. There were things in life you didn't need proof for, you just felt them, the way you felt the pull of gravity or the ache of something you'd lost long ago. That night, he sat in his study, the lights dim, a glass of whiskey untouched beside him. He thought about the day she had left, about the way her voice had cracked when she said his name for the last time. He had been so certain then, so cold and logical, believing that cutting her out of his life would protect him from pain. But all it had done was hollow him out. Now, seeing her again, seeing the life she had built without him, made something inside him unravel. The next morning, he couldn't help himself. He lingered by the window, pretending to check his phone, pretending not to watch as Leah and Sophia stepped outside. Leah was holding a basket of groceries, her movements careful and practiced. The little girl chattered beside her, holding onto her mother's skirt. When she laughed again, Adam felt the same ache as before, something between longing and guilt. He told himself he shouldn't approach her. She deserved peace. He had no right to disturb what she had built. But his heart didn't care for logic anymore. It beat faster every time he saw them, every time he heard that child's laughter. He found himself walking the same route as them, standing in the same park, just far enough not to be noticed. It was pathetic, he knew that, but he couldn't stop. The sight of Leah smiling, even at a distance, felt like something sacred he didn't deserve to witness, and yet he couldn't look away. One afternoon, as he returned home, he noticed a small drawing fluttering on the edge of his fence. It was done in crayon, 2 stick figures holding hands, and a smaller one between them. The handwriting underneath said, "Mommy and me, Ann." The rest was smeared, washed out by what looked like rain. Adam picked it up carefully, staring at it for a long time. The lines were simple, the colors uneven, but the message was clear enough to make his throat tighten. He looked up at Leah's house and felt an unfamiliar sting in his eyes. For the first time in years, Adam Miller, the man who thought he had control over everything, realized he was completely powerless. Against the past. Against fate. Against the truth he had run from for too long. And as the sun began to set over the quiet street, one thought echoed in his mind over and over again: what if it wasn't too late? The following week felt like a dream Adam couldn't wake from. Every morning, he told himself that what he'd seen, the woman, the child, the eyes so achingly familiar, was nothing more than coincidence, some cruel trick of the universe meant to remind him of what he'd lost. Yet every day, when he stepped outside, he saw them again. Leah walking hand in hand with Sophia, her hair shining in the sunlight, her laughter mingling with her daughter's. It wasn't just resemblance anymore, it was connection, unspoken and undeniable. The way the girl tilted her head when she thought, the way her lips curved when she smiled, even the quiet concentration in her expression when she was drawing in the park, it was like looking at fragments of himself reflected through the child. He didn't know how to approach them. What could he possibly say? "I know I broke your heart, disappeared from your life, and left you to raise our child alone, but now I've changed." It sounded absurd even in his own mind. He had faced boardrooms full of ruthless men, closed multi-million-dollar deals under pressure, and yet, the thought of walking across that street and saying her name made his throat close. For the first time in years, Adam Miller, the man who prided himself on composure, felt like a coward again. Every evening, he found himself by the window, watching their lights flicker on. Sometimes he'd see Leah reading on the couch, her hair falling over her shoulder as she turned the pages. Sometimes Sophia would appear, running in circles with her stuffed rabbit, her laughter echoing faintly through the open window. It became a ritual, quiet and torturous, a life he could only observe but not touch. And with each passing day, the ache inside him grew stronger, more unbearable. One afternoon, fate decided for him. He was returning from a business meeting when he noticed movement by his driveway. A small figure was crouched near his gate, her curls shining in the afternoon light. Sophia was tracing something on the pavement with a piece of pink chalk. She looked up when she saw him, and those bright blue eyes locked on his. For a moment, Adam couldn't move. The world seemed to stop, as if the air had thickened around him. The child smiled, without fear or hesitation. "Hi," she said, her voice soft but confident. "You're the man who lives there, right?" He managed to nod, still stunned. "Yes," he said slowly, his voice lower than he intended. "And you must be." He trailed off, afraid to finish. She didn't notice. "Sophia," she said proudly, pointing at the little chalk drawings on the ground. "I'm making flowers. Mommy says the ground needs colors before winter comes." Adam crouched down beside her, his heart pounding. "You're doing a great job," he said gently. "They're beautiful." She beamed at the praise, then offered him a piece of chalk. "You can help me if you want." He hesitated, then took it. For the next few minutes, he drew awkwardly, feeling more human than he had in years. She talked endlessly, about her school, her favorite cartoons, how her mom made the best pancakes in the world. Adam listened, every word cutting and healing at the same time. It was the sound of innocence, of a world untouched by the pain he had caused. When Leah's voice called from across the street, Sophia jumped up. "That's Mommy," she said cheerfully, waving. Adam straightened as Leah approached. She stopped when she saw him, surprise flashing across her face. For a moment, she didn't say anything. Then she looked at Sophia, who was proudly pointing at her chalk drawings. "Mommy, look! He helped me make flowers." Leah's eyes flicked to Adam's, and he saw the storm there, the anger, the confusion, the fear, and something else buried deep beneath it that he didn't dare name. She smiled faintly, the kind of polite, distant smile reserved for strangers. "That's very nice, sweetheart," she said, her voice steady. "Come on, it's time for dinner." Sophia pouted but obeyed, skipping back to her mother's side. Leah turned to him briefly, her gaze sharp. "Don't," she said quietly, so only he could hear. "Please, Adam. Not now." Then she took Sophia's hand and walked away. He stood there long after they'd disappeared inside, staring at the drawings on the pavement. The flowers were messy, uneven, childish, and yet, they were the most beautiful thing he'd seen in years. That night, he couldn't stop thinking about them. Leah's voice, the way she had said his name, not with love but with exhaustion. Sophia's laughter. The weight of 3 small words, "Not now." It wasn't rejection. It was a plea. The next day, he saw them again. Leah avoided his gaze, but Sophia waved from across the street, grinning wide. He felt a smile tug at his lips, one that surprised him with how natural it felt. It had been years since he had smiled like that, without calculation or reason. But behind that warmth was something else, determination. He had lost them once because of pride, fear, and his obsession with control. He wouldn't make the same mistake again. He didn't know how to make it right, or where to begin, but for the first time in years, Adam Miller knew what he wanted. Not a contract, not another business deal, not the illusion of perfection he'd built his life around. He wanted to know the woman he had broken and the child he had never met. He wanted to know what forgiveness felt like. And standing there, surrounded by the fading chalk flowers drawn by the little girl who shared his eyes, he silently promised himself he would find a way to earn it. The following days felt heavier for Leah than she wanted to admit. She tried to convince herself that seeing Adam again meant nothing, that it was just an unfortunate coincidence and that life would go on as before. But the truth was, every time she looked out her kitchen window and saw his car parked across the street, her hands began to tremble. The past she had buried so carefully was now living just a few steps away. She wanted to hate him again, to remember only the pain, but her heart refused to cooperate. Too many years had passed, and yet the memory of the man who once made her feel both alive and broken had never really left. She told herself she had moved on, but the moment their eyes met, she knew she had only learned to live around the wound, not heal it. For Adam, restraint was nearly impossible. Every instinct told him to stay away, to respect the wall she had built. But every day he found new excuses to cross paths with her. He started walking to work instead of driving, timing his steps to match the moment Leah and Sophia left for school. Sometimes, he would buy coffee from the same cafe she went to, pretending not to notice her, though he memorized every detail, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear, the way she smiled politely at the barista, the tired gentleness in her eyes when Sophia tugged on her hand. He had once thought that the world revolved around his achievements, that his power came from the things he controlled. But now he realized how small that power was compared to what he had lost. One afternoon, rain began to fall suddenly, heavy and cold, as Leah hurried home with Sophia under a too small umbrella. They stopped at the gate in front of their house, struggling with the lock, when a deep voice came from behind them. "Here," Adam said, holding out his umbrella. The word startled Leah. She turned, meeting his gaze for the first time since that day in the office 5 years ago. For a moment, she didn't know what to say. The sight of him standing there, his hair damp, his eyes as piercingly blue as she remembered, stirred too many memories. "We're fine," she said finally, her voice tight. "Go home, Adam." He hesitated, then nodded slightly. But instead of walking away, he crouched beside Sophia, who was struggling to close her backpack. "Let me help," he murmured. The little girl smiled, oblivious to the tension in the air, and let him fasten the zipper. "Thank you," she said sweetly. "Mommy, he's nice." Leah's chest tightened painfully. She couldn't bear to look at him, so she took her daughter's hand and led her inside, closing the door quietly but firmly. Adam stood in the rain long after they were gone, the cold water running down his face. It wasn't the rejection that hurt, he deserved far worse. It was the distance in her eyes, the emptiness she now carried where love once lived. He had caused that, and he hated himself for it. When he finally returned to his house, he sat by the window and watched the lights flicker in hers. He could see silhouettes moving, Leah setting the table, Sophia's small figure bouncing around with energy. It looked like peace, but he knew better. He knew how hard Leah had fought to build that fragile peace, how much she had sacrificed to keep it. And he also knew that his presence was now threatening to break it all over again. The next morning, Leah woke early. She hadn't slept much, her mind spinning between anger and longing. She made breakfast for Sophia, packed her school lunch, and tried to shake off the thoughts that clung to her. But as she tied her daughter's shoes, Sophia suddenly asked, "Mommy, why does Mr. Miller always look sad?" Leah froze, her hands stilling for a moment before she forced a small smile. "Maybe he's just lonely," she said softly. "Some people have everything and still feel alone." Sophia tilted her head, thinking, then nodded. "Maybe he needs a friend." Leah swallowed hard, blinking back a wave of emotion. "Maybe he does," she whispered. Later that week, Leah fell behind on work and needed help carrying a heavy box from her car. She didn't see him approach until he spoke. "Let me," Adam said, already lifting the box before she could refuse. She wanted to protest, to tell him to leave her alone, but the words didn't come. There was something different about him now. His tone was quieter, his movements slower, almost careful, as if he was afraid she might break if he came too close. "You don't have to pretend, Adam," she said, her voice trembling despite her effort to stay firm. "You can't just show up after 5 years and act like nothing happened." "I'm not pretending," he replied quietly, setting the box down near the door. "I know exactly what I did. I can't take it back. But if you'll let me, I want to try to make it right." Leah turned away quickly, tears burning in her eyes. "You can't fix this," she whispered. "You can't give back what you took." Adam nodded slowly. "Maybe not. But I can be here now. For you. For her." That was the first time he admitted it openly, the truth that had been hanging between them since he saw Sophia for the first time. Leah didn't answer. She couldn't. The weight of his words pressed against every scar she had tried to hide. She watched him leave, his shoulders slightly hunched, rain still falling from the sky. And for the first time since their paths had crossed again, she didn't feel anger. Just exhaustion. And a tiny spark of something she refused to name, something dangerously close to hope. That night, Leah lay awake long after Sophia had fallen asleep. She thought about the way Adam had looked at their daughter, not with curiosity or confusion, but with quiet recognition, with tenderness he probably didn't even realize showed in his eyes. Maybe people could change. Maybe time really did strip away what was shallow and leave only what was true. But she wasn't ready to trust him, not yet. He had broken her once completely. Trust wasn't something she could just hand back. Still, as she listened to the rain outside and the soft breathing of her child beside her, Leah caught herself whispering into the dark, "Why now, Adam? Why after all this time?" Across the street, Adam sat by his window again, watching the faint glow of a lamp in Leah's home. For the first time in years, the loneliness didn't feel endless. It hurt, yes, but there was something alive in that pain. It was the ache of wanting to be better, to be worthy of what he had lost. And though he didn't know how or when, he made a silent promise to himself, that he would stay this time, no matter how long it took. Days passed with a strange kind of tension that neither of them could escape. Leah tried to convince herself that Adam's reappearance didn't affect her, that she could go on as before, focusing on her job, on Sophia, on the small world she had carefully built. But it wasn't that simple anymore. Every time she stepped outside, she felt his presence like a shadow that refused to fade. Sometimes she would catch sight of him across the street, sitting on his porch in silence, his eyes distant but always drawn to her house. Other times, she'd hear Sophia mention him casually, talking about how Mr. Miller had given her a flower or helped her feed a stray cat near the park. Leah wanted to tell her to stay away, to end this quiet intrusion before it grew into something she couldn't control, but every time she looked at her daughter's face, bright, innocent, and filled with joy, she couldn't bring herself to take that away. Adam, for his part, was trying to be patient. He had learned that forcing things only pushed people further away. He didn't show up uninvited, didn't press for conversation, didn't try to make Leah forgive him with empty gestures. Instead, he waited for small moments, for the brief glances when their eyes met and something unspoken passed between them. He noticed how tired she looked at the end of the day, how she often paused outside her door as if gathering strength before going in. He noticed how protective she was of Sophia, how every decision she made revolved around her daughter. And with every passing day, he found himself more drawn to both of them, not with guilt alone but with a longing that felt painfully real. One Saturday afternoon, Leah was walking home from the market when she saw him waiting outside. He wasn't dressed like the powerful CEO she once knew, his sleeves were rolled up, his hair slightly tousled, and there was something unexpectedly ordinary about him. "You're here again," she said, her tone cautious but not sharp. He smiled faintly. I live here, remember, he said softly, then hesitated. Can I carry those for you? She almost said no, but the bags were heavy, and she was too tired to argue. Fine, she said, handing him one. They walked in silence for a while, the sound of the sea faint in the distance. It wasn't comfortable silence, but it wasn't hostile either. It was fragile, like something that could break or heal depending on the next word spoken. When they reached her house, she turned to take the bags, but Adam didn't move. He was looking at the small tricycle by the porch, the chalk drawing still faintly visible on the path. She's incredible, he said quietly. She's smart, kind. I can tell she gets that from you. Leah felt her throat tighten. Don't, she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. Don't make this harder than it already is. Adam looked at her, his eyes full of regret. I'm not trying to, he said. But you have to know. I never stopped thinking about you. About what I did. About her. She shook her head, stepping back. You don't get to say that now. You don't get to walk in and rewrite what happened. I know, he said after a moment, his voice breaking. I know I don't deserve a second chance. But Leah, I'm not asking you to forgive me for what I said. I'm asking you to see who I am now. I was selfish, afraid, too proud to admit I wanted something real. I thought I was saving myself from failure, but all I did was destroy the one thing that ever mattered. Leah wanted to stay angry, to remind him of every tear she had cried, every night she had spent holding their baby and wondering how he could have left so easily. But standing there, hearing his voice crack, she realized that the man in front of her wasn't the same as the one she had known before. Time had changed him too. Sophia's voice interrupted them, calling from inside. Mommy, who's at the door? Leah stepped aside, her heart pounding, and the little girl appeared, her blue eyes bright with curiosity. Mr. Miller. Look, I drew a picture for you, she said, running forward with a piece of paper in her hand. Adam knelt down instinctively, accepting the drawing. It was simple but powerful, a house, a tree, and 3 people holding hands. He looked at it for a long time before saying, "This is beautiful, Sophia." Then, without thinking, he added softly, "You're very talented, sweetheart." Leah froze at the word. Sweetheart. It was something he used to call her. The sound of it made the air between them shift. Sophia grinned, unaware of the tension. You can keep it, she said proudly. It's you and Mommy and me. See? Her small finger pointed at each figure in turn. Adam's breath caught in his chest. Leah stepped forward quickly. Sophia, honey, Mr. Miller has to go now, she said gently, taking her daughter's hand. Adam stood, folding the drawing carefully, his eyes glistening. Thank you, he said, his voice quiet. I'll take good care of it. Then he turned and walked away before Leah could say anything more. That night, Leah found herself staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. The memory of Adam's face as he looked at the drawing wouldn't leave her mind. There had been so much emotion in his eyes, pain, regret, love, all tangled together. She didn't want to believe it, but she could feel the truth of it deep down. People changed when they were forced to face what they had lost, and maybe, just maybe, Adam had changed too. But forgiveness wasn't something she could give easily. It wasn't just about her anymore, it was about protecting her daughter from being hurt the way she had been. Across the street, Adam sat in his office, the child's drawing in front of him. He traced the lines with his fingers, feeling an ache that was almost unbearable. He could see the innocence in every crayon stroke, the way Sophia saw the world, simple, kind, full of love. He had been given a glimpse of the life he could have had, a life he had thrown away out of pride. But now, he wasn't going to let it slip through his fingers again. He didn't know how Leah would ever trust him, how she could forgive him after all he had done, but he knew one thing for certain: he wasn't going to walk away this time. Not from her. Not from the little girl who unknowingly called him back to life. In the quiet of the night, with the waves crashing softly in the distance, he whispered to himself, "I'll earn my place. Even if it takes the rest of my life." The next few weeks unfolded like an uneasy truce between two hearts that had never stopped belonging to each other. Leah tried to carry on as if nothing had changed, but everything inside her felt restless. She caught herself watching Adam through her window when he returned from work, the way he loosened his tie and ran a hand through his hair, as if trying to shake off the weight of the day. There was something different about him now. The arrogance that had once defined him was gone, replaced by quiet restraint, as though he was afraid of breaking what was already fragile. It confused her and, in some strange way, softened her. But with every softening came a sting of memory: the night he had turned away, the words he had said, the tears she had cried into an empty pillow as she held their newborn in her arms. Adam felt her hesitation every time they spoke. She was polite but distant, kind but guarded. He couldn't blame her for any of it. In fact, he admired her more for it. Leah had built a life without him, a life that was small but real, and he knew that to truly be part of it, he couldn't just demand forgiveness. He had to earn his place quietly, slowly, one step at a time. He started with small things: helping with groceries, fixing her mailbox when it broke, shoveling the snow from her walkway before she even woke up. He didn't expect thanks. Seeing her smile for even a moment was enough. One evening, Leah's car broke down near the grocery store. It was raining hard, and she tried to start the engine over and over, but it only sputtered helplessly. Sophia sat in the back seat, hugging her stuffed rabbit, her wide eyes reflecting the storm outside. Leah was about to call for a tow truck when she saw headlights approach. Adam stepped out of his car, already drenched from the rain, and without saying a word, he opened her hood and started checking the engine. "You don't have to do this," Leah said through the open window, her voice tired. "I can handle it." He looked at her briefly, his hair soaked, his shirt clinging to him. "I know you can," he said simply. "But let me help anyway." For the next 15 minutes, they worked side by side in the rain. She held the flashlight while he adjusted the cables, their hands brushing once or twice, each touch sending sparks through both of them that neither acknowledged. Finally, the car sputtered to life. Leah exhaled, a soft, shaky sound that was almost a laugh. "Thank you," she said quietly. "You're welcome," he replied, his voice low and sincere. For a moment, they stood there, the storm raging around them, the silence between them filled with everything they couldn't say. Then Sophia's voice broke through. "Mommy, is he coming home with us?" Leah froze, her hand tightening on the door. Adam's eyes met hers, and there was something raw and vulnerable there. "No, sweetheart," Leah said gently. "Mr. Miller has to go home now." Sophia pouted. "But he fixed our car," she protested. Leah smiled softly, brushing a strand of wet hair from her daughter's face. "That's why we'll thank him properly next time." Adam smiled faintly and stepped back, watching as Leah started the car and drove away. But as her taillights disappeared into the fog, he felt something shift inside him, a quiet certainty that no matter how long it took, he belonged there, with them. The next day, Leah found a note slipped under her door. It was short, written in Adam's careful handwriting. *, you don't owe me anything. I just want you to know I'm here if you ever need help, with anything. Take care of yourself. And Sophia, *. For a long time, she stared at the note, her fingers trembling slightly. It wasn't what he said that moved her, it was what he didn't. There were no grand apologies, no promises, no manipulation. Just quiet presence. It reminded her of the man she had once glimpsed beneath the surface, the one who had loved her before fear turned him cruel. Later that week, Leah fell ill. It started as exhaustion and turned into a fever that left her dizzy and weak. She tried to hide it from Sophia, not wanting to frighten her, but her daughter was too perceptive. That night, as Leah lay half-conscious on the couch, she heard the faint sound of knocking. When she opened her eyes, Adam was standing in the doorway, concern etched on his face. "Sophia came to my house," he said softly. "She said you weren't feeling well." Leah tried to sit up, but the room spun around her. Adam crossed the space in 2 steps, kneeling beside her. "You need to rest," he murmured. "I'll take care of things." She wanted to protest, but she was too weak. She closed her eyes and felt his hands lift her gently, his touch careful as though she were something fragile. He carried her to her room, covered her with a blanket, and sat beside her for hours. When she stirred, she saw him reading quietly by her bedside while Sophia slept curled up at his side. The sight hit her so deeply that tears filled her eyes before she could stop them. He looked up, catching her gaze. "You didn't have to stay," she whispered. "I know," he said softly. "But I wanted to." They didn't speak after that. He stayed until morning, checking her temperature, changing the cool cloth on her forehead, moving with the kind of tenderness that didn't need words. When sunlight finally crept through the curtains, Leah felt a peace she hadn't felt in years. For the first time since he'd come back into her life, she didn't feel afraid of what might happen next. She just felt safe. When she woke later that morning, Adam was gone, but a note was left on the nightstand beside a small vase of wildflowers. * Get better soon. I'll bring breakfast later. Leah held the note to her chest, her heart beating too fast. She wanted to tell herself it didn't mean anything, that it was just another gesture, but deep down she knew it meant everything. It was the first real act of love she had seen from him, not the love of words or promises, but the love of presence, of staying when it was easier to walk away. Across the street, Adam watched from his window as Leah opened the curtains, sunlight framing her face. She didn't know he was there, but he didn't need her to. All he needed was the quiet knowledge that she was still in his life, that maybe, just maybe, he was starting to earn her trust again. For the first time in years, Adam Miller felt something close to hope. The days that followed were unlike anything either of them had experienced before. Leah recovered slowly, her strength returning with each passing morning, and though she tried to convince herself that Adam's help had been nothing more than a neighbor's kindness, she knew better. The memory of him sitting by her bed through the night was burned into her mind, a quiet, wordless gesture that spoke more than any apology could. Every time she saw the wildflowers he'd left on her nightstand, now beginning to wilt slightly, she felt that strange ache in her chest that she had tried so hard to suppress for years. She couldn't deny that something had shifted between them, something fragile but real, like the first warmth after a long winter. Adam, on his side, felt the same change. For years, he had lived with guilt like a shadow that followed him everywhere. But lately, that shadow was breaking apart, replaced by something gentler, something that felt like redemption. Every day, he found a reason to stop by, not to impose, but to help in small ways. Sometimes he brought groceries, sometimes he fixed something around the house, sometimes he simply played with Sophia while Leah rested. There was no agenda behind it, no expectation, just quiet presence. And slowly, the walls Leah had built began to crack, even if she didn't want to admit it. One evening, Leah invited him in for dinner. It wasn't planned, it just happened. Sophia had insisted that Mr. Miller stay after he brought over a bag of oranges, and before Leah could say no, the little girl was already setting the table. "Please, Mommy," Sophia begged, her bright blue eyes wide. "He helped me build my puzzle today. We can share our spaghetti." Leah hesitated, but something in Adam's expression, an almost shy uncertainty, made her relent. "Fine," she said softly. "But just dinner." It was the first time they had shared a meal in over 5 years. The room was filled with the sound of clinking forks, the quiet hum of conversation, and Sophia's constant chatter. Adam laughed, really laughed, for the first time in what felt like forever, and Leah caught herself smiling too, though she tried to hide it behind her glass of water. There was a familiarity between them that neither could ignore, an echo of the life they might have had if things had been different. But beneath that warmth was tension too, an unspoken question hovering in the air: what now? After dinner, when Sophia had gone to bed, Leah began clearing the table while Adam helped her without being asked. They worked in silence for a while until he finally spoke. "I missed this," he said quietly. "Not the food, not the small talk. Just this. Being near you." Leah froze for a moment, her hand tightening around a plate. "Don't," she said softly, without turning around. "Please, don't ruin this with words you can't take back." Adam set down the glass he was holding and took a slow breath. "I'm not trying to ruin anything. I just need you to know that I'm not the same man I was. Back then, I thought love made me weak. I thought it would destroy everything I'd built. But the truth is, not loving you destroyed me anyway." Leah turned then, her eyes full of tears she refused to let fall. "You think saying that fixes it?" she whispered. "Do you know what it was like, Adam? To be alone, to give birth, to look at your child and see the man who walked away? You don't just erase that because you regret it." Adam stepped closer, his voice steady but low. "I don't want to erase it. I want to carry it with me. Every mistake, every moment I failed you. Because that's how I'll make sure I never do it again." For a moment, neither of them moved. The air between them was thick with years of pain and longing, every word heavy with memory. Then Leah shook her head and turned away. "I can't do this," she said, her voice trembling. "Not tonight." Adam nodded slowly, his chest tightening. "Okay," he said softly. "I'll go." He left quietly, closing the door behind him, but as Leah leaned against the wall, her whole body shaking, she knew that something inside her had already changed. The next morning, she found a small envelope on her doorstep. Inside was a simple piece of paper with one line written in Adam's handwriting: "I'll stop trying to make you forgive me. I'll just try to make you happy." Leah read it over and over, her hands trembling, until finally, she pressed it to her chest. She didn't know if she was ready to forgive him, but she couldn't deny that those words pierced straight through her defenses. That afternoon, she saw him in the park with Sophia. He was sitting on the grass while the little girl showed him how to make daisy chains. Leah watched from a distance, unnoticed, and felt something deep and quiet settle inside her. Adam wasn't pretending anymore, he wasn't performing or chasing redemption. He was just there, patient, present, trying. And maybe that was what she had needed all along. That evening, when he walked her and Sophia home, Leah didn't stop him when he offered to carry her daughter, who had fallen asleep on the way. Watching Adam hold Sophia, his large hands cradling her so gently, made her heart ache in a way she couldn't define. When they reached her door, she whispered, "Thank you." He smiled faintly, brushing a strand of hair from Sophia's face. "You don't have to thank me," he said softly. "You have no idea what this means to me." After he left, Leah stood in the doorway for a long time, the cool night air brushing against her skin. The stars above were faint but clear, and for the first time in years, she felt like she could breathe. She didn't know what would happen next. She didn't know if she could ever trust him completely again. But she knew one thing: the man who had once broken her heart was no longer a stranger. That night, as she tucked Sophia into bed, her daughter mumbled sleepily, "Mommy, I like when Mr. Miller smiles. He looks less sad now." Leah ran her fingers through her daughter's hair and whispered, "Yes, sweetheart. I think he does." When Sophia drifted off to sleep, Leah sat there for a long time, watching her breathe, thinking about everything they had survived. She thought about Adam's words, about the quiet pain in his eyes, and about how much strength it took to stay after everything that had happened. Across the street, Adam couldn't sleep. He stood at his window, looking out at the light still shining in Leah's house, and for the first time in years, he didn't feel like a man haunted by his past. He felt like a man standing at the edge of something fragile and beautiful, something worth every scar he carried. And as he watched that single light flicker softly in the night, he whispered to himself, "This time, I won't walk away." Winter came slowly, painting the city in soft shades of gray and gold, the kind of quiet season that made people retreat into themselves. For Leah, it felt like the world had slowed down enough for her to breathe again, but that stillness was filled with questions she wasn't ready to answer. Every morning, she saw Adam across the street, sometimes shoveling snow, sometimes walking with Sophia to the park when she had to work late, sometimes just standing on his porch, looking like he wanted to say something but never did. The silence between them had changed. It was no longer heavy with resentment. It was cautious, waiting. She found herself thinking about him more often than she wanted to admit, replaying every conversation, every look, every quiet act of kindness that had slowly rewritten the image she had once held of him. The man she had hated for breaking her heart wasn't the man who stood before her now, and that realization scared her more than the heartbreak ever had. Adam had changed, truly changed, but change wasn't enough to erase the past. He knew that. He knew Leah carried years of pain inside her, and that Sophia's happiness came before anything else. But the more time he spent near them, the more he felt the pull of what he had lost. It wasn't just about redemption anymore. It was about love, raw, patient, imperfect love. He found himself thinking about Leah in the smallest moments, when he made coffee in the morning, when he heard a song that reminded him of her, when he caught Sophia laughing and saw her mother's smile in that small face. He didn't dare to hope for forgiveness, but hope came anyway, uninvited and relentless. One evening, Leah decided to invite him over for dinner again, this time intentionally. It had been months since the night he fixed her car in the rain, and she wanted to thank him properly for all the times he had been there for Sophia. When he arrived, the table was already set, candles flickering softly between them, the air filled with the scent of roasted vegetables and cinnamon. He looked almost nervous when she opened the door, and she smiled faintly. "You can relax, Adam. It's just dinner," she said, though her voice betrayed a hint of something more. Dinner was warm, easy, filled with laughter. Sophia dominated the conversation, telling stories about school and the friends she had made, and Adam listened like every word was a miracle. Leah watched him quietly, realizing that for the first time, he wasn't pretending to be the man he thought he had to be. He wasn't the CEO who once spoke with authority and cold precision. He was just a man sitting across from the woman he loved, listening to his daughter talk about the shape of clouds. When Sophia went to bed, the quiet that filled the house was heavier than before, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Leah brought 2 cups of tea and handed one to him. "She adores you," she said softly. "You know that, right?" Adam smiled, looking down at the cup in his hands. "I don't deserve it," he admitted. "But I'll never stop being grateful for it." There was a pause, and then Leah asked, almost without thinking, "And what about me? Do you still think about what we were?" He looked up, his eyes meeting hers, and for a moment she saw all the years of regret and love that had been trapped behind them. "Every day," he said quietly. "But I don't think about what we were. I think about what we could still be." Leah's heart tightened. "You can't just say things like that," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You don't get to walk in and make me feel this again." Adam leaned forward, his tone gentle but unwavering. "I'm not trying to make you feel anything, Leah. I just need you to know that I'm here. I'm not running anymore. Not from you, not from her, not from what I should have been all along." Tears filled her eyes before she could stop them. "You hurt me," she said, almost a whisper. "You destroyed me." Adam's voice broke. "I know. And I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you never feel that way again." The words hung in the air, heavy and raw, and for a long time neither of them moved. Then Leah stood up, pacing toward the window. Snow was falling outside, gentle and endless. She turned to him finally, her voice barely audible. "You don't make promises, Adam. You keep them." He stood too, taking a slow step closer. "Then let me prove it," he said quietly. "Not with words. Just time." She didn't answer, but when he reached the door to leave, she stopped him. "You don't have to go yet," she said softly. He turned back, surprise flickering in his eyes. She hesitated, then smiled faintly. "Stay for a little while. Just stay." That night, they sat on the couch in silence, the fire crackling softly. Leah rested her head against the armrest, her body finally relaxing, and Adam sat nearby, his gaze gentle but steady. When she started to drift to sleep, he reached out instinctively, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. She stirred but didn't pull away. "You're still here," she murmured half asleep. "I told you," he whispered. "I'm not going anywhere." When she woke the next morning, he was gone, but a blanket had been draped over her shoulders and breakfast was waiting on the table, a small plate of toast and coffee, steam rising from the cup. A note sat beside it, * for you and Sophia. Have a good day. * Leah sat there for a long time, her fingers tracing the edge of the note. She didn't cry this time. Instead, she smiled, small and tired but real. Weeks passed, and what began as tentative coexistence grew into something deeper. Adam became part of their days in quiet, unobtrusive ways. He drove Sophia to dance class, helped Leah fix the leaky roof, shared dinners that turned into conversations about everything and nothing. Slowly, she began to trust again, not with blind faith, but with cautious hope. One evening in spring, they all went to the park together. Sophia was chasing butterflies, her laughter echoing through the air, while Adam and Leah walked side by side. "It's strange," Leah said softly, watching her daughter. "I used to think love was something that hurt too much to risk again. But maybe it's not about avoiding the pain. Maybe it's about finding someone who makes it worth it." Adam looked at her, his voice quiet. "You made it worth it, Leah. Even when I didn't deserve you." When Sophia ran back to them, Adam lifted her into his arms. The little girl giggled, pressing her small hands against his cheeks. "You're smiling again," she said innocently. "You should always smile. You look happy." He glanced at Leah, and for the first time in years, he truly was. Leah reached for his hand, their fingers intertwining naturally, as if they had never stopped belonging together. And as the sun began to set, bathing the park in golden light, Leah realized that she wasn't afraid anymore. The past had scarred them, yes, but it had also shaped them into people capable of loving more deeply, forgiving more honestly, and living more truthfully. They had broken once, but this time, they were building something stronger from the pieces. Adam looked at the two of them, Leah, the woman who had taught him what real love was, and Sophia, the child who had unknowingly saved him from himself, and he knew that everything he had lost was standing right there beside him. He bent down, kissed the top of Leah's hand, and whispered, "I'm home." Leah smiled softly, her eyes glistening as she looked at him and their daughter running ahead through the sunlight. For the first time in 5 years, her heart didn't ache, it felt whole. And in that moment, she understood that sometimes love doesn't come back to you when you're ready. It comes back when you finally become the person who deserves it.